Good afternoon. Welcome to the April 23rd, 2026 regular meeting of Central Community Power. I'm Dita Shimani, Vice Chair, representing the City of National City. We welcome members of the Community Power Team and good members joining us today at the front of Senate Administration Building. I now call this meeting to order. Ms. Mel, please call the roll. Dr. Fisher. Present. Dr. Lasensi. Mr. Supper. Chairman Long. Thank you so much. For the purpose of allegiance, Councilman James.
Ready to begin?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Land acknowledgement. Next, we acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the region and the region. The land acknowledgement is a critical step toward working with the Native communities to create meaningful partnerships and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of the cultural resources and homelands. It's a commitment to honor these ancestral grounds that were the traditional lands of the Kumeya'i. Thank you. We welcome and invite Warren Weissman, Associate Director of Finance, Capital Investment Plan, to introduce himself. Thank you, Mr. Weissman. Welcome. You're in trouble with Mr. Tim. Thank you. We will now managing public comments. To note, written comments submitted for the board meeting were emailed to board members prior to the meeting and will be posted online. Secretary, the public. Thank you, Ms. Martin. We will also move on to the consent calendar items 1 to 11. 26, 2026 meeting minutes. 2, receive and file update on programs. 3, receive and file update on power services. 4, receive and file update on customer operations. 5, receive and file on IT and 6, receive and file update on human resources. 7, receive and file update on marketing, public relations, and local government affairs. 8, receive and file treasurer's report for 7-month period ending 2026. 9, receive and file community advisory committee monthly update. 10, receive and file regulatory and legislative affairs. And the code agreement keys and facts for regulatory council services from May 31st, 2028 for a total not to exceed contract amount of 1.2 million. So, do you have any preference to poll or Thank you. I have a motion and a second. So, sure. Sure. And third, consider and approve appointment of Marty Hentley to the Community Advisory Committee to fill City of Encinitas vacancy. Director San Antonio will introduce the item and turn it over to Xiomara Crespo. Why am I reading this? Councilmember San Antonio, please.
Sure. National services. Strong mission should be that's
Yeah. Sure, thank you. That's correct. Hello, hello. Question. Hello. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Whatever you went through. Right. Jeb, Ulisa. Let me ask Ulisa. But this was done. He was the. I know. That was okay. Oh. Yeah. Hello. Picture? I took a picture of it in action, it's at the gym. No, it's watching. I can't remember, you were so above the audio.
Molly, you have a really nice photo of your profile photo.
No, thank you, and it's not been touched. That was from a photographer that he hadn't touched it yet.
It's a good photo. I like it. I'm jealous.
Need some airbrushing and.
No, no. It just looks like a he did a good job. We can get it.
It's on my LinkedIn profile. It's an old photo. I'm a marketer. I know better. Yeah.
Let me see.
When you have
No,
the-
no, I can't take my glasses off. And you'll know my secret.
Start testing. What corner your house? There. Sorry.
I would see. Thank you. I need to have one. Right. That's exactly why I do it. No one wants to hear somebody saying. No.
No. Oh, I know. I see her. I follow her. Yeah.
My husband too, that's why he put me on ChatGPT. He's like, talk to the ChatGPT.
Oh. I like her. She's yeah, very personal and I think she wanted to be a news reporter. Yeah.
No, we like that.
Yeah.
I am also good in small doses. Me too. Well, not officially. They didn't get it right. I don't know. ChatGPT. I went in for it. I went in for it and then Kaiser was like, no. I needed to go to Kaiser. I need to go to another one.
I'm also pretty active. I totally understand. The people at home. That's like and I had they also is at a point what for sale and stuff like that. So I know Pacific Goods my shortcut.
And then we just ask this.
Test.
We have not had problems and then now we do.
Yeah.
Test. Test. Thank you for listening.
okay, it's not bad, but it's like, it's not lemon grow. I forgot the lemon grow. They have a overrated combo.
You good, man? All right. This opportunity to serve on the community advisory committee. Because of passion, of energy efficiency, smoking technology, and environmental stewardship. I'm eager to bring a community perspective to help strengthen our program. I was an early adopter of community power. As an automatic component, my research and made a deliberate decision to stay active in because I believed in long-term value. And preparation for today, I did research. A survey. Was 10% efficiency. I'm happy about that. I reduced my usage by percent. I understand. I know that I did something right. It's also good to understand. So just to share. Some of the mobility technician and Encinitas, and I recently completed cert training. So, with my 15 years in Encinitas, I still feel community, and I am a trusted resource for my neighbors on local issues, including energy choices. Not that a week ago, my neighbor in this way, her daughter was so gracious, I thought I would. So, we'll have some tips. So, I want to the advisory committee, and didn't know if you had questions for me. Thank you, Miss Hinton. Thank you so much. And Maya, do we have any public comments? Madam Chair. Oh, Madam Chair. Laura, do you have any comments for Miss Murray or question?
Teaching you. So, did you, Laura? Tell us your secrets.
A lot of small evenings. I wasn't home, but yeah.
Children to take this up. Appreciate that. That's
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Dr. San Antonio, any comments, sir? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion from you.
Motion to approve, to CIC.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Please to call the roll.
Dr. Fisher? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Murray. Congratulations. Welcome. Thank you. The city of San Jose to sell resource adequacy and by system resource adequacy for a total net motion of 4.5 million. Key director to present this item and it says here 5 minutes.
Myself too, so thank you, Vice Chair. I try to give some detail into this transaction. I know it's a little complex on the surface. So, and why we're bringing this to you is there's several compliance obligations we have, although we have a lot of procurement autonomy. One of these is critical MTR with mid-tier reliability. This is procurement obligations for several years with yearly obligations, and these need to be from projects that meet certain criteria, most notably that they add reliability to the grid. So these could be battery projects, these could be battery projects with storage. There's some requirements for longer duration, and there's some requirements for geothermal. For the core obligation, which is think of that as generic batteries that you're bringing onto the grid. This is our current obligation, and then our currently contracted position. Again, thanks a lot to your efforts on the coding contracts that the team has brought to you over the last couple of years. Again, we did a lot of procurement 22, 23, 24. that added to this. So you can see for 27 and 28, we have a lot of length in the portfolio, meaning we have over procured. We procure for other reasons, but we were well above the compliance obligations. But fellow CCOs this lucky for these couple of years. And as they got into late 25 and early 26, it's not impossible to contract for a project at this point that's going to be online in 27. And if you're going to meet that compliance obligation, the project has to be online by June 1st of that calendar year. So it's nearly impossible. So they reached out to us because when we were 3 months ago, we knew we had linked and we had a transaction that made sense for both parties that I'm bringing to you today. So what that transaction includes, the thing that's alike. So there's a buyer transaction and a sell transaction. Both homes start deliveries in June of next year. Both for 10 years. Both have fixed pricing for that period. The notional difference between the two, and we get into where there's a premium for us, but the notional difference of the is $4.5 million. So we're paying a premium in the contract transaction. On the sell side, so again, the notional value that we're selling is a little over $4 million a year, a little over $33 million over the full take of this one. We are selling for the online this year. And because of its attributes is what's called MTR eligible. So again, something that other sister CCAs that we're able to get before they set up right in time. And again, we're spending close to $58 million. It was what's called 24/7 area. Now, most child next target hopefully will make that make sense. But think of it as already we can count towards more resource acquisition. And that's in our agreement shortfalls and failures to do it. But that's highlighted between the two transactions. So again, the volume that is selling just different attribute types. Think of it that way. When we're procuring resource adequacy, we can procure that from battery resources, we can procure that from thermal resources, we can procure that from land or solar, and they all have different shapes and they all have different benefits for our portfolio. So what this means is we're able to one, follow CCA meet its compliance obligation, but also essentially switch out in our portfolio a contract and an attribute that allows us to count resource adequacy for something that can count for 24 hours. And this chart kind of shows the benefit of that. So this is what the resource adequacy team has to do on a monthly basis is show how we meet a compliance obligation. This is like data, but this serves the purpose. But one is how much resource adequacy we have to have for every hour. So that shows you can see we have peak load in the evening, we have to have more resource adequacy contracted. If we have a level, and so it's a 100 megawatt battery, and it's a 4-hour battery, we could count that 100 megawatts in 4 of those hours. Okay, so it's rocks the graphis. It's a jungle board you're putting together. So you have 4 megawatts. The same resource that is 100 megawatts could count as 24/7. We can count that 100 megawatts in each of these 24 hours. So it helps fill out much more compliance obligations. During the period that these contracts, 27, we definitely have open positions and all beyond what we're trading for here. So instead of having to go out to the open market and spend above what we'd be spending in this contract to buy those 24/7 resources, we can do that here and swap out something that we don't need. And I think it's a win-win for us and the CCA we're working with. So the city of San Jose, technically under the city of San Diego is San Jose, and that's who we're working with on this transaction. I think that's everything for me. I think that's close to 5 minutes, and you're taking questions.
Thank you, Ken. No, we don't have any public comment, ma'am. You want to turn over to the board for comments, questions, or motion?
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve and a second. Are there any other comments from the board? Saying none, please call the roll.
Fisher? Yes.
Thank you. This is the approval of this 10-year agreements with the city of San Jose. Thank you, Ken. Resolution 13, review and approve 2026 community rate adjustment to be effective as of May 1st, 2026. Our CEO Karen James will introduce the item and turn it over to Lucas O'Toole, Senior Director of Data Analytics and Customer Operations, and Tim Mangliknak, Senior Director of Finance, to finalize presentation. And this is 10 minutes. Says, look at Mary, at me.
Customers. Changes to this generation position rates. Response to customer faces seems recommended adjustment to user rates to this system of affected rates and specific customer service. SDG while also showing sustainability. How SDG generation rates. Now power base 10%. Change the power of the plus premiums. Change consideration 26 rates. Senior Director of Customer Operations on board in 10 minutes, Senior Director of Finance. Changes just consideration. Thank you.
Inside of today is to present staff recommendation. This essentially as to town in January 6. So this can see the base rates. Or third time. You can structure structure subjectives and apparently customers can expect to see that. So as customer, before we get into the little body but some since then January or January is coming. It's up to the January to make up to April 1. It's a big design. Stop to count for that. To this was from March 20. That's actually acknowledge consider the values customer competition necessity of calibration adjustment as well as actually all of the so essentially you figure out discovery Sauce. So, so after this motion, I the line competition in December. You see how they franchise fee. So lots of times we can dollars cover what you see in that you have to delivery in terms of that reporting of an agency. Just is also how we calculate the discount FPV and the commission CRO and franchise fee. So it's continuing to improve the traffication from sponsors. Looking at this, the customer view the service, the service. To some black bills. So this really that's what we're talking today. Continue that traffication. So obviously equity amongst customers in terms of what they're seeing ultimately in their bills. Like, so we have discussed media at this point to really do. That's about the virtual 10 to 2 p.m. To expect the next members new words from 10 to 2 p.m. Words also assume that early expected general and large commercial industrial customers, but two different in the CDB rate structure. The second one was there's a based on what we said. Based on the market prices. So I was really excited. This is in rates right now. I was like, that you're seeing today. Percent discount, 2% discount. We this investment. So the customers always get some moving forward. It's something we're going to for calendar 2026. It's a projection in the margin. It's a sudden action from what we've done with this $1 in the margin. It's a difference of the margin, but so we can and then that. Let's see. So was considering it's a bit it's also a good fluctuation just in terms of proposing and this discount hours history and that 10% power discount and 10% power base discount. Yeah, some discounts expect to see.
that this has changed and this counts are able to this program maybe it's not expensive. So, so was the company is going to expect to see the budget program as a measure customer, a small measure customer, there's more commercial observations are the police officer side and the just to general data, general data, general data. Some in January. So so that the chargers, no position, sound the board. This is true for student classes. So you do it on the side, you're going to set a 7, then this is actually small commercial piece. You can expect to see that same plus this obviously subject to usage planning, which 10% discount the return generation component. So about percent savings, those, which is service options, service option one, which is such a percent discount generation component. So 50% savings. And this is also true for large commercial and industrial customers. Go next slide, please. This is one of the most like industrial rates. So recognize the melody of the sounds sound so that about the customers understand what we're thinking. So we know how to do. Nation. So and there's a question similar to everybody. This is not map of duration of cost expensive, particularly in 2027 going forward. I'm sure we have some observation for this evening, and my regards to the questions and comments on the board. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. Thank you so much. Mara, do we have any public comments on this?
We don't have interest.
Thank you. And over to the board, any comment, questions? Councilmember Fisher, yes, please. Director Fisher.
So, those SDG monthly rates of stuff. I'm just curious because it creates cat and mouse that they just kind of put up the task and running after all these calculations. And does this happen often?
That's a very good question, Dr. Fisher. Certainly does. I think it's and come to the board. Yeah.
or salary, but this the two changes or adjustments we are expecting some time to be on the transmission revenue side. So then it's like it's going to adjust possibly some of that. And we have to have them approved by the Public Utilities Commission, or they just continue? So the adjustments, whether on the revenue side or on the other side or both, we have to go through that. They have to provide some reasonable reason why they're continuing to change their rates, I'm assuming. So, it's a petition, I mean, it's a very good objective. Has to go through the SDCP the process.
It's probably good fact check them, but I doubt they do.
We should hit the staff to bring forward more comfortable when they come to it, saying that was just, a few months back. I think it really does help. So it's not really cutting us on our end, we just have to react to what they're doing. So I appreciate staff kind of putting ahead and again, I was putting the right there first. Super important for myself and not putting my colleagues here because we do get a few calls here and there and people go with therapy, but at least we can deliver action and moves and keep on feeling like the bad guy in the room.
Thank you, Director. Any other? Well, I'm glad, and thank you for the diligence. I think they know that we are really watching and nothing passes the eyes of the community power staff with regards to most especially this controversial PCIA. And so I'm grateful for your diligence. Thank you so much. And Director Ilo Rivera.
STG. Does it's and it I'm curious to what extent in terms of this series asking questions of STG just to kind of on Fisher was saying about whether Anders and so this agency with mission to take that. And there's a conflict in San Diego because we get to know
service. Conversation. Just kind of circle back and see if those are specific. Sharing compliance with the franchise agreement.
this is the case that I said we spoke. TPC is actually sets it's for folks. Show you the documents. And look, this is something. To Mr. Eugene does business. So procedures. That's another to try to find it there. To the evidence. And part of that is being partners in the food power. So I just like signing records because without official lives in isolation, in those spaces that we said, we're responsible to enhance what we're trying to do here.
Time.
So the recommendation here is to approve rate adjustments for power on and power services as contained in attachment A, go into effect as of May 1st, 2026. The recommendation includes continuing to offer similar community default power on service electricity generation commodity rates at 50% cheaper compared to Sunny gas and electric generation rates and probably service electricity generation rates 10% cheaper than generation rates. E-certified in terms of thank you. Thank you. In a second, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Yeah.
Fisher. Sassy. Representative Turner. Mrs. Second.
Thank you so much, Luke. Thank you, Tim. Thank you. Well, item 15, receiving strategy. The CLP members will introduce the item and bring it over to Lee Friedman, Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships and Modern and Senior Local Government Manager, in his presentation, and this has no minutes.
Strategy. Strategy responds to interest in ensuring power procurement translates into tangible opportunities. Strategy housing structure reliability. Associate Director of Strategic Actions, General Manager, Senior Manager of Development, Strategy.
Thank you so much. Vice Chair, members of the board, thank you for having us here. Again, my name is from the Associate Director of Strategic Initiatives, and working with Morgan Adam, I'll introduce himself quickly. Good evening, Vice Chair Uman, members of the board, Morgan Adam, Senior Manager of Local Development, our services procurement teams. I work with Ken, we're the ones sort of signing long-term agreements to fulfill our contract needs, our power needs. So members of the team here with us right now. Andre actually guys really instrumental in helping draft this development strategy, and we've also presented to the ad hoc advisory committee as a full advisory committee. That's what the feedback was earlier this month. This is the stage of the development strategy. Services team has been doing like several years, which is some movement of the strategy to completely start over with the development. Stakeholders are extremely interested in the way that we approach local development, which was why we want to create a sort of more holistic document that explains the overall strategy that we take when we're looking at these projects in our community. It's a framework that sets the types of project and outreach and strategies that our team will use. If you can list that it doesn't get into specific timelines or specific types of initiatives. As seen as far as the leadership strategy, and from it will come different initiatives that the power services team will use to meet our strategic goals and need of the development. So, strategy to outline which we intend to have strategic of distributed energy resources 2035. Strategic growth plan is actually split two different components within your community power. So we have 150 megawatts, which is the responsibility of our power services team to be procurement of energy sources, and a separate 150 megawatts the responsibility of the management team to meet that goal through providing activities like solar resilience. Now, our goal here is that these distributed energy resources support resource adequacy, reliability, resilience that's closer to our load, and keep investment jobs and benefits here in our region. What is it's important to define the development strategy. So, projects must be located in either San Diego County or Ontario County to be considered by our definition. Distributed resources, terminology begins with the word as well as the presentation. And specifically, this development strategy, the emphasis is on inflow and community scale development or the infill development. So think about the types of stuff that goes on to existing rooftops or in parking lots or as part of the areas. So giant solar farms or wind farms that sort of more that utility scale. I think some of documents clearly to formally establish vision about your principles to look at the development. And so our vision is very clear: is to advance a distributed energy resources that delivers clean, reliable power, strengthening community resilience, local jobs, and regional equity. We're going to show some common principles as well, including transparency, workforce development, and protection. Feasibility, which we're going to look at as well. Power feasibility is a term that we're going to be coming back to, and successful local development. So, it's large, it's diverse, a lot of different types of customers and opportunities are here. As we're assessing opportunities, we also have to be cognizant of our vulnerabilities. And here again, these a bit deeper. Interconnection, professional limitations, and restricted resource valuation. Opportunities for us to so we're taking addressing those challenges in direct engagement with SDGA, especially when it comes to interconnection. These are some alternative step that says these vulnerabilities out together. To help distinguish opportunities like site control, timeliness, potential difference for the community benefits. The needs of a school district, for instance, are probably not different than the needs of a large commercial customer. It's an emergency. So we want to make sure that we're approaching each of our potential partners for the development
with a clear understanding of what are they trying to accomplish and how can we work together to create that good benefit for the potential partner in the community. And having conversations with some of those potential partners, including a number of agencies, school districts. I'm really excited to soon bring some type of great information back to the board to share. Let's make sure that once these productive conversations turn into actual projects, that I would be using a holistic approach. This is management proposal evaluation criteria, but this is like services team is providing projects. It's beyond simple just like we demand it also that we can't just be the determinant factor. So because the project provide co-benefits, does it have results to the goal? What can its impact be on customer rates? How big is the project and how soon could it be completed? If anyone just development resources of value like resource adequacy, capacity contributions. So the using is best on whatever not simply just a price. Next to there's recent news that we will look at the SDG and CPCRs, the recognition area. This is a good long time. This is valid because of community perspective, lack of transparency, engagement, or communication. This is why I think it's so critical that community and stakeholder engagement is a part of our overall strategy. Is critical. And the community members really care about things that are being built in the community, and they're surprised by things, even if these are general people want, that still can be a difficult to overcome. So something we can ensure that most of the things and benefits community actually has. Sure that this is not just for the benefit of the community, but also government agencies, because the staff, our elections, their staff, the rights surprises. Something really helps build trust and confidence in the ability to make these projects. Shared responsibilities between public developers and community power when it comes to engagement. When I was just talking about more engagement with the stakeholders, responsibilities to as a public agency and to set expectations, the requirements, be transparent about all those processes, evaluation of criteria, facilitate interaction between some community and agencies when appropriate to make sure that the right people are having conversations with each other. Pass it back now to who's going to start to talk a little bit about this. We'll be happy to answer any questions. Just wanted to touch on some of the procurement pathways, how to prepare projects. So, one of the distinguished, I wanted to make sure that I shared a bit about tonight is between fundamental and fundamental procurement. So, at its most sort of basic description, it's just whether or not a solar battery project is interconnected behind the customer's meter, or is it connected directly to the grid? It seems like such a simple distinction from a procurement standpoint, but like different species of procurement. So, this is really the most typical utility or CCO procurement projects. These are resources that are tied directly to the grid. They're fed to the grid. They interact with they participate with the price on market. So basically, we receive revenues from selling energy to the so ancillary services. We also get resource adequacy and value for projects. We get deliverability. Deliverability is it's the process by which certain resources are allocated. Stamping approval, yes, often is for RA. Was what Kenny was talking about earlier, like trade with San Jose. So
these tend to be larger projects. And so one of the advantages is, you know, we could meet the goals through fewer large projects. Some of the challenges though, as Lee was referencing, especially in our region, interconnectability is really challenging, and it tends to be really costly if you can even get the interconnection approved at the distribution scale that we're talking about for these community scale projects. The ability to sort of operate process is seems to be all but impossible right now. So these are sort of some of the headwinds that have faced our meter projects that we're pursuing. So behind this is one issue that we're sort of exploring and developing. So this is resources that are interconnected behind our customers. We're still doing power planning. They're sort of operating behind those loads. Really good opportunities for public agencies, schools, CNI customers, and instead of participating in the CAISO marketplace, we benefits through reducing our load and our purchases from CAISO. And by shaping our load, we're able to reduce the cost of that resource adequacy that we need to procure or buy. So tremendous value potential through that sort of load reduction, load shaping. And these are projects that would need to be sited on our customer sites. So it needs to constitute our load. One of the challenges again, if these are our customers, they also need to remain our customers, and we can't let a customer not leave our service. They always have the choice. If they choose to do that, we need to work out. And essentially to take the project over. In terms of sizing projects, it's also limited to the load of the site. So, for example, you can't, install a project on a warehouse roof and airtight that consumes almost nothing. You can't max out that roof most likely. You kind of limit the load that is there on the site. Is because of high meter projects reduces the number of electrons that flow through the distribution grid. Ultimately, it does reduce SDG's revenue and introduces the shift risk. And so that's just something that we're intent on understanding the impact of that to SDG and our ratepayers. So as procurement pathways, these are actually both done around front of the meter interconnections. So this is a really good option for sort of small community scale front of the meter projects. There's a standardized contract. There's a published pricing. So basically, if someone wants to develop a small project and sell to us, they know the price that they're going to receive. They know the sort of application criteria for these projects. There's no competitive solicitation. As I mentioned, these are from the meter, so they do face those headwinds that we just talked about. And as a result, we struggle to get as much engagement with this historically as we would like. So we're looking to address some of those obstacles. Solar Advantage, this is our otherwise known as GT. This is the CPC equity program that we're administering, where we can procure up to 20 megawatts of project. We get cost recovery from the CPC, and in addition, the CPC has done 20% discounts to low-income residences in our communities. We've had this program, obviously for obvious reasons. We've run 2 solicitations today and are planning to release a 3rd solicitation this spring. Public partnerships, just to make sure that there's unique partnerships with public entities, such as the U.S. military, obviously the U.S. Navy being to us, imagine support from grants or philanthropic sources. Sometimes these projects can be more capital intensive, really offer significant value to our communities and to our public partners, as well as to the agency. I just want to some we're continuing with SDG to address some of these interconnection and deliverability challenges that are navigating to extract additional value from projects. We're still pursuing selective and strategic fundamental opportunities that the value potential on our de-list, and encouraging partners to explore opportunities and collaborations there, including with member agency staff from the respective local governments. To accomplish these, we are looking on pathway, like the triage, we're going to opportunities and again, working to design more procurement and initiatives. We're also looking at a consultant to develop a map that will sort of show us within the region where the areas are that are more likely to be able to be interconnected to the grid. So that will help, help us from, pursuing projects and developer partners from pursuing projects that are sort of destined to fail. And always educating decision makers on project considerations and procurement pathways so that we can be guided strategically by leadership. And we keep a close eye on local and state policy, funding opportunities, state grants, and then as Lee mentioned, early coordination with our stakeholders to make sure that we are setting our projects up for success. That ends my slides. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Adam and Lee. Brian, do you have any public comment? Thank you. Turning to the board, this is a receive and file informational update on San Diego Community Power's local development strategy. Board? Thank you so much. Yes.
This is how I understand. I have options there. So right now, to make an yes or no. Agencies to understand and visual understanding. Now, I think it's assessment of the current state of things, and I really specifically was behind the new initiative. I think the intent is to do with that of engagement. We do meet regularly with all the member agency staff. We have a monthly staff meeting with all member agency staff, where we discuss opportunities as they come up. And as this initiative gets built out more to the point where we're ready to start having those discussions, and we're going to closely with the member agency staff, with agencies, school districts. We've started those conversations already about education. So so we're making sure that people know these things as they come up. So So necessarily seems as well. I think it's a good point. And this is something that, for instance, discussions that we're having right now about these potential projects have been elevated all the way up to Chris McFadden. Right. And we've been having positive and productive conversations. So I think in terms of decision makers, we're doing a good job of getting those people into the room. With other member agencies, other public agencies, we tend to focus on making sure we're talking to people who are managing the facilities side of the house, because those tend to be the people who have previously been working on renewable energy projects. Because it's that and that one people want to take advantage of. It's not the first time most of these agencies have ever done anything in the renewable space. People have done solar before, shooting green batteries now. So it tends to be a sort of usually on the established target team, what chain command, and already has some experience moving these remote projects forward. And I think we're doing a good job of getting those folks to the room and having these conversations. Thanks. Essentially, so conversation on the side of those and maximize opportunities for just like continuous conversation of decreasing costs or increasing revenue, sizing that so we can increases. And this and so I encourage everyone there to most holistically possible, like cost reduction, reduction. And this is like just from there's somebody who's been told a specific job. And these sit there with the same started is entirely different. Is there to have existing and certainly missing right now. It's I think there's a lot of questions on this front. Just because I see enormous potential, I think you can tap into those. The assumptions made with political metals. Those that maybe make sense that something just maybe really change that could really depends on so from our cities agencies to be
Sure enough, if we don't ask, I mean, we don't get informed, and I think it's our responsibility as I mean, people who sit here in the dais that makes those policies to ask those questions. So we're also educated to be able to, related to our ratepayers. And I'm not bashful to ask. But thank you, Lee Adam, for this information. I'm glad that it's coming to us early so then we can ask those questions. Thank you, Madam CAO. I know this is coming back to us, right, ma'am? For further, one.
It's a receiving file right now, so once it's adopted, this will just be our strategy, but then the strategy initiatives will continue with the rules initiative to the board.
Good. So we continue the conversation, we continue to ask questions, so then we are educated. Thank you, board. This is the receiving file informational on Central Community Development Strategy. Thank you so much for this report.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, do you have any further comment? Okay, thank you. CEO's report, and they have anything to report? Very well said. Thank you. Any director's comments? Yes, Director Nzinza.
So I just want to thank joining stage as city chair of something else, the sustainability right from the city chair. It's using the city chair the same as this has about 10 to power the garbage trucks. So
Thank you. Director Rivera. Director San Antonio. Director Fisher. Director Suzuki.
and just real quick, I just want to thank somebody
That's what we was talking about, community engagement, like we're educating our ratepayers. Well, thank you all. Has the appreciate participation today. The next regular meeting of the community on May 28, 2026 at 5 p.m. and we are adjourned.